Congratulations, you have come up with your tests of change, you've iterated on them, and they work! That's a great reason to celebrate. Now it's time to hand the project back to the daily operations team and for them to hold your hard-won gains. It may seem like all you need to do is share your recommendations by email or at the next staff meeting and you're done. But it's not that easy. Getting everyone to implement a change can be hard. And it's just as hard to keep the improvement from reverting back to the old processes and old results. In this video, you will learn how to identify the key elements required to successfully move the project changes to daily operations and the essential components for operations to sustain those changes. Let's start with the handoff process. Consider the example of a relay race. Just as runners on a relay team take turns running, your project team and the daily operations team take turns managing the project work. In order to help your changes get adopted by the daily operations team, you need a handoff just as clean as when relay runners successfully pass the baton. When passing a baton in a relay, there are several important preparations. The receiver needs to get up to speed before the handoff, and both parties must be aligned on the handoff process. So step 1, first get up to speed. In a relay race, the receiving runner starts running before the team member gets to them. In the same way, you need to start the handoff much earlier than the end of the project. A huddle is a great place to share quick updates on your project. At the beginning of a project, you can raise awareness that the project is happening and what the purpose is. As you do your current state analysis and learn about your root causes, you can get their feedback on barriers. As you test and iterate on changes, give them a heads up, especially if it will impact them, and follow up with what you have learned and how you will adjust. Getting buy-in can never start too early. Step 2, align the handoff process. Imagine the first runner extends the baton and finds the second runner has the wrong hand extended, and they miss their handoff. That doesn't happen because the teams align on how they're going to hand off the baton. They coordinate so well that the second runner doesn't even need to look back to make the handoff. In the same way, the project team and operational team need to align not only on the process that you've been improving, but also the process of the handoff. Create an implementation plan together, such as the sustain plan. Here are a few questions your improvement project team will need to answer when making your own implementation plan. What changes will be handed back? This is what you have been diligently working on, and you have tested and iterated on your changes until you decided which changes work. Do one last pass to make sure you're only handing back the most important elements and that you're keeping the changes as simple as possible. Do you have the changes documented? If there's existing standard work, update that. If there isn't, then it's often helpful to write new standard work and have a consistent place to store it. It's very hard for people to remember if it's only documented in an email. Also, remember to train people that haven't started yet. It's helpful to add your updated processes in your new hire training. As you're documenting your changes, make sure to include why these changes were made. Your colleagues are smart and they have existing processes that are different than yours, so they're going to adjust the process. If they understand why you made the changes you did and which are the key pieces that have to be consistent, then it's a lot easier for them to follow your advice. Here's an example of a one-page overview to explain why the process was important and one page with instructions. How will staff learn this process? When I started my career in medical device, I had the cleanroom technicians meet me in the gowning room, and I would read the changes to their 50-page procedure and have them sign that they were trained. Looking back now, I don't know how I expected them to remember and apply these changes. We should learn from Confucius when he said, "Tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, involve me and I understand." The more the learners can do the process with feedback to quickly learn, the more effective the training will be. It takes time to help the learners experience the change and reflect on it. And sometimes telling is enough. But the more important the change is, the more important it is to take the time to make sure that they really understand it. Going back to our list of questions, we've talked about what changes to make, how to document the changes, and how to train on the changes. The next question is, who do you need to communicate with? Figure out what information they will need. And think about who will be impacted upstream and downstream. Remember to include what the leaders of your stakeholders need to know too. Finally, what metrics should continue to be tracked? You have been tracking your data and running experiments, and you have a lot of insight into what is important to track. Assign the metrics the operational team will need to track in order to know whether this process is stable and working as intended. Stay with the operational team throughout that handoff, and once you've finished, remember the crucial step to celebrate with the whole operational team. It has been a big lift for all of you, and you did it. You transitioned your project back to the operational team. Now let's focus on the operational team. How does the operational team sustain the improvements designed by the project team? According to the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, the key to sustaining improvement is to focus on the daily work of frontline managers, supported by a high-performance management system that prescribes standard tasks and responsibilities for managers at all levels of the organization. There's a lot in that. Let's return to the running metaphor. When you're running, you need to pace yourself, embed the standard work in your daily routine, perform self-assessments, and track your metrics. Step 1, pace yourself. This is not a short race, and you don't want to burn out in the first leg. The project team had a lot of resources and dedicated time to creating these changes, and there are only so many changes that you can absorb at a time. From being a clinic manager, I know firsthand how hard it is to want to keep the momentum up, and yet also to know how little time there is to focus on anything that's not related to today's patients. So learn from my experience and give yourself the permission to slow down the pace of change. Limit the scope and number of improvements your team is working on at a time so you can focus and complete each project. Step 2, embed in your daily routine your standard work. Just as runners train every day, you need to figure out how you can fit this work into everything else you do on a daily basis. Otherwise, the new work likely won't stick. I worked with a team that did a great job of integrating their changes into their existing systems. They tested changes to their rooming standard to make sure that it flowed well. Then they trained current staff during their weekly staff meetings with reminders in their daily huddle. And they updated the training binder that all preceptors use to train new staff. Another team made room for their MAs to add a new step by moving other work to a different role that could do that task more efficiently. Step 3, perform self-assessments. Runners constantly run little experiments to see how they can improve. As a manager or lead, you also need standard tasks to help you assess how the process is going. Just as your project team observed your process to understand the current state, now it's your turn to observe your new current state. Let me introduce you to Shauna Taylor to share how she assesses how changes are working.
What I've found particularly helpful with sustaining improvements has been the routine and the habits of daily huddles and connecting with your leadership teams and allowing your leadership teams to then go back to their own teams and huddle with their teams. Is there opportunity for improvements? Is there something that needs to be tweaked?
As you identify issues in implementation, how you adjust depends on why the process isn't working. Sometimes the training is not understood and you need to explain it in a different way. Or if the new process doesn't fit well with an individual's workflow, work with them to align their workflow. Or if it's an issue for many people, the standard process may need to be updated. Step 4, track your metrics. Runners use their watch to make sure they're on pace. A father of quality management, Joseph Duran, taught that after finishing a quality improvement, you enter a phase of quality control, where it's important to monitor the system for stability and address problems as they come up. The project team already figured out what metrics to use to monitor your system. Continue to track those metrics frequently so you can see when your system stabilizes. And when it does, you can decrease your checks and feedback to the team.
The way we've tracked our improvements is either through data or having the team create a smiley face of, was that a positive experience for a patient? Frowny face, it was a negative experience for a patient, and then totaling those up at the end of the day. Or being able to have the data. We have a great EMR system, and so being able to pull data out of there to see Are we seeing more diabetic eye exams this month? Or are we seeing less and our improvement effort that we made last month isn't quite doing it, so we need to tweak it and do something different? And so you can have really complex data or you can have really simple data, but it just helps tell the story.
When I tracked data as a clinic manager, it wasn't just for me to know. I needed my staff to understand the implications of the data. So I posted the trends, and once a week in our daily huddle, we spent a couple minutes reviewing the errors and discussing how to keep them from recurring. This kept our improvements manageable. Once we stabilized, we shrunk that discussion to monthly, celebrated our accomplishments, and then moved on to a new improvement. It took a lot to develop a team culture of improvement, but it was worth it. In this video, you learned how to identify the key elements required to successfully move the project changes to daily operations, and the essential components for operations to sustain those changes.
Before we started using these methods, it felt like chaos. We put all this work and effort into something, and then 6 months, 3 months later, you turn around and be like, what was that one thing we did a while back? And it felt really good when we did it, but what happened of that? What happened from that?
In some ways, the project work is easy compared to the work of implementing a change. Sustaining these changes takes a lot of practice to do well. So give yourself grace to get it wrong and to keep practicing. You are doing great.